Hi, I'm Tiana Schowe. I'm a writer, entrepreneur, leader, and energy. This is my podcast, Ain't Quite Right. Join me as we laugh, learn, and live big. Hello, everyone. This is Tiana Schowe, and welcome to my podcast, Tiana Schowe, Ain't Quite Right. Thank you for tuning in to this episode. I'm recording this in the beginning of January 2021, so Happy New Year. I hope all of you had a lovely holiday season and are excited to start 2021. Now, I know 2020 was a very eventful year. The internet memes are winning when it comes to talking about saying goodbye to 2020, because we had a lot of challenging things happen in the world. This was not specific to any one people group, but across the world as a result of the coronavirus. And a lot of that was out of our control. So the podcast that we ended 2020 with was setting goals for the year. And I stand by the principle that life is 10% what happens to you and 90% what you choose to do about it. So while there was a lot of really terrible things that happened to a lot of people in the year 2020, including saying goodbye, unfortunately, to loved ones that were not able to survive this virus and the pandemic, a lot of that was out of our control. But what we did have control over is what we're going to do about it. So if you did not listen to the prior episode, I would encourage you to go back and listen to it and set some goals for 2021. 2021. It's not too late. It doesn't matter when in the year you're listening to this. It's never too late to set goals. And that's actually even a C.S. Lewis quote. It's never too late to set a goal or dream a dream. So, don't get sidetracked. Don't get derailed. If you fall off the wagon, get back on the wagon. It's totally worth it. Today's episode, I'm kind of excited about. I had an entire kind of schedule set up. And as I was sitting down preparing for this, I kind of decided to go off script a little bit because I wanted to do something a little bit unique for today's episode. And we're going to talk about things you would tell your younger self. Have you ever sat down and said, if I could go back to being 15 again, or 20 or 25 or 30, whatever age it is for you, for some of you, maybe 40, 50, whatever age it is for you, if I could go back to my younger self and know what I know now and relive my life with what I know, what would you do differently? Or what would you tell your younger self to encourage you going through the journey that you're going through? I think this is a healthy practice for a myriad of reasons. And as usual, we start and end with a quote. So I'm going to start with this quote. I wanted to give you a little bit of a preface as to why I chose this topic. And then I'll give you the quote and then we'll kind of go back to the why. But the quote is from John Maxwell. And John Maxwell, I love him. He's got a lot of wisdom. But he says, reflective thinking turns experience into insight. Reflective thinking turns experience into insight. And the reason that I think it's healthy to go back and think, what would I tell my younger self, or what would I do differently? Not because you want to dwell on the past is gone, but because when you go through that exercise, you're actually asking yourself, what have I learned? How have I changed? How have I grown? And that reflective thinking takes all of this experience that you've gained and all of the knowledge and wisdom and the growth that you've experienced in life, and it allows you to condense it down and remind yourself of what you've learned. Now, the reason that's important is a couple of different things. It's important to remember what you've learned because it's just healthy to say, wow, I've learned some things and here are the things I've learned. But also because the whole point of this podcast, again, is to laugh, learn, and live big. I do this. I spend my time doing this. I spend my personal money on this. I don't make any money on this podcast. I spend money to do this because I have a passion for helping people live their best life. And I decided to go on this journey several years back. And through reading a lot, through trial and error, through surrounding myself with great people, having wonderful mentors, a coach, all of these techniques, my life is, by my design, incredible. I love my life. And I can't, while I don't want to throw stones at my past, I can't say that that's always been the case. I haven't always loved my life. And part of that was my own doing. A good part of it was my own doing. Some of it were circumstances out of my control. The older you get, obviously when you're a child, you have a little control over your life, but the older you get, the more autonomy you get, the more control you have over your life. But the vast majority of my growing all came from mindset. It's amazing how many limiting beliefs or how many unhealthy beliefs we hold on to. It's funny because as a coach, I see these breakthroughs all the time where I'll be talking with somebody and, I say, okay, what's concerning you today? And they say, well, this is my biggest area of frustration. And after an hour-long conversation, they've come full circle to realize that they were actually the cause of their biggest frustration. And it wasn't in a negative impact, but it's in an empowering impact because they're able to go back and say, oh, all I had to do was rethink about how I approach the situation for me to not find myself continually frustrated. Well, that is the story of life. Life is, the only difference between who you are today and what you have today and what you really want for yourself is what you have to learn and how you have to grow. And that's why I do this, because I'm passionate about helping you grow. So looking back over your life and saying, these are the things that I've accomplished, not only allows you to kind of check in with yourself and say, wow, I've learned a good bit about life, and make sure you're applying all the things that you've learned. I love this Dave Ramsey quote: don't make the same mistake twice because you have plenty of new mistakes to make. And one of the ways you prevent yourself from making the same mistake twice is to just sit down and think about the mistakes you've made and say, okay, I'm not going to repeat that mistake. I made that mistake once. I'm not going to repeat that again. But also to give you fuel for setting future goals, because you want to set goals for yourself that are so big that you have to grow into the person it takes to achieve them. And a lot of the reason why people won't set big, audacious, hairy goals — that's a Jim Collins quote, by the way. That's what he calls his goals: big, audacious, hairy goals. A lot of the reason why people won't set goals that force them to grow is because they don't have the belief in themselves that they can do harder things than they've done. So looking back on your past and looking at how you've grown is a good way to remind yourself you've done hard things. You've probably accomplished more than you realize you've accomplished. You've just never stopped to give yourself credit. We don't do enough self-reflection in this culture. So that's why I wanted to start off the beginning of 2021 with just saying, let's stop and pause and take a look at, regardless of what age you are when you're listening to this, look at the sum of your experience and what you've learned. And the question I'm going to ask you at the end of this, when I share with you the list of what I would tell my younger self, the question I have for you is, what would you tell your younger self? What have you learned? How have you grown? What have you not given yourself enough credit for in your journey in life? So I wanted to share with you, this is not a comprehensive list. If I made a comprehensive list of all the things I would tell my younger self, we would be here for a long time. I was a young, ambitious, stupid kid. I hope we all were, by the way. Your younger ages, when you're younger and you're more resilient in every way, that's the age of learning. That the whole purpose of being as resilient as we are as young, so we can bounce up against life a little bit, figure it out, and grow. The older you get, the more it hurts, because usually the bigger the consequences of your decisions are as well. Not to say you can't make life-altering decisions at a young age, but the vast majority of our dumb mistakes we make hopefully aren't life-altering as a kid. But the older we get, and the more awareness we have, usually the bigger the consequences are. So this is just kind of a short list of a few things I wanted to share with you that I think are both relevant for the time period we're in, and I'll talk about that, but also a good thing for all of us to remember. These are key principles, I guess I would say, that apply to anybody across the board. So as I go through this list, I want the whole purpose of sharing this with you is primarily to inspire you to ask yourself the same question. And so I'm going to end the podcast asking you that question. But just to remind you the quote that we started off with: reflective thinking turns experience into insight. So the first thing I would tell my younger self is, don't worry about what other people think about you. Obviously, one of the hardest challenges of growing up is learning to find your self-identity. And obviously, being a teenager in school is one of the most brutal ways of doing that because you have so much social pressure. But what I've come to learn, and I learned this from the book, The Courage to Be Disliked, is you cannot make somebody else like you. You just can't. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have responsibility to have good social awareness and behave well. You should still treat people with kindness 100% of the time. You should still, serve others and put others first. And this isn't, when I say don't worry about what other people think about you, this isn't live a selfish, reckless life and do whatever you want. This is a call to be who you are unapologetically, and don't compromise who you are in the futile attempt of trying to make somebody like you. Because here's the reality. You really can't make somebody else like you. You can't. As long as you are being the best version of yourself and you're not being a terrible human being, if somebody chooses not to like you, that's on them, not you. And I see so many people who compromise who they are in the futile attempt of trying to win the favor of other people. And here's the reality. If you have to change who you are for somebody to like you, now this doesn't mean grow. This doesn't mean if you don't have to grow. That's not what I'm talking about. You're going to have to grow. But if the core of who you are, if you have to change who you are for somebody to like you, you shouldn't be trying to vie for that person's attention or favor. It's hardwired into our brains, both physiologically and psychologically, to need the approval of the people around us. That's how we survived as a species. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this in his book, The 12 Rules for Life. But just because this is a normal part of our psychology doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy. Not every instinct we have is healthy. So our instinct to want social acceptance can oftentimes cause us to lose sight of who we really are and our true purpose and what makes us unique. So I would tell my younger self, don't worry about what other people think. I spent too much of my youth trying futilely to change the core of who I was. This isn't maturity and growth things. I needed to do all those things. We all need to grow and mature. But futilely attempting to change the core of who I was to try to win social acceptance. And it didn't matter what I did, because I was never going to change those people's minds. So Adlerian psychology calls it the separation of tasks. Your task is to treat people well and be a comrade. Their task is to decide what to do with it. So don't waste your time and energy worrying about what other people think about you. Be who you are unapologetically, and don't let what other people think about you bother you. It's your life. Like here's the thing that's so interesting about it. You have to live with yourself. You have to like yourself. What other people think about you shouldn't enter into your perception. You should learn to enjoy your own company and like yourself, because that's who you live with. That's the voice in your head that you actually live with. So don't compromise that for other people. That's one of the things I would tell my younger self. The second thing I would tell my younger self is that life is a journey of learning. The more open-minded you are and the more willing to learn you are, the easier your life will be. The biggest mistakes I've made in my life have been the result of being a little Miss Know-It-All, thinking I had the answers. I can say with a great deal of certainty that there are very few things that we as human beings can 100% fully know. I think that this is a huge fallacy that exists in so many different aspects, where we allow ourselves to think we're an expert in something, that we understand something fully, when even if you just take science, I mean, our understanding of the atom has developed over years. The world is so big, so vast, so complex that to have a true mastery on anything is very, very rare, because there are very few things that are simple enough to truly master. It should be about the journey of learning, not mastery, because mastery is, I think, almost unattainable. Not to discourage you from trying to become a master, but life is too diverse. Things change too much. It should be more about the journey of learning. And I got myself into a lot of trouble being unwilling to learn, being closed-minded. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't absolute truths. As a person of faith, I've openly shared about this. I'm a Christian, and I've even started a Christian podcast that's purely faith-based. It's called Made to Conquer. But as a person of faith, I believe that there are absolute truths. But I've also come to realize that some of what I perceived to be truth was just my perception of the reality. One of the things that I did this past year is I decided to start off with a brand new Bible, because I don't know, if you're a Christian, you know what I'm talking about. You highlight your Bible. And what going back and rereading already pre-highlighted sections caused me to do is think about that section the way I had always thought about it. And instead this year I decided I was going to read my Bible from scratch, and just rather than assume I understand what something means, ask the Lord to speak to me what that passage means, because I believe God's multidimensional. And so while his truth remains the same and the core concepts of truth remain the same, he can take one passage and give it many, many meanings. And it can be applicable in many different ways. And so I decided just to read the Bible with candid open-mindedness, radical open-mindedness. And that's what's caused me to start a second podcast, because I realized that I had held on to so many of my own beliefs about something that I failed to see the bigger picture or another application of a scripture, or that there's so much I don't really understand yet. So I would tell my younger self, the more open-minded you are, the more willing you are to learn, the easier your life is going to be. Because holding on to a fixed mindset, and again, this goes back to Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, this belief that you are a fixed product and that you're either good or you're bad, or you're smart or you're not smart, is what prevents us from truly growing and learning. And the longer you hold on to a fixed mindset and the belief that this is just the way that it is, the harder your journey is going to be, because you're not changing and you're not growing. And I can tell you this, everything in the world is changing. Change is a guarantee in life. So be willing to learn. You don't know everything. You don't have it figured out, and that's okay. Accept that. And let go of the misconception that you will have it all figured out, and just embrace the learning process. Be humble. The more humble and the more willing you are to learn, the easier your life is going to be. I wish I would have known that when I was 16 years old and I knew it all, because I carried that mentality way into my 30s, way too late. The third thing I would tell my younger self is life can be hard. It's going to throw you some curveballs. It doesn't matter how much you plan, how many things you do right. There's going to be something out of your control that will throw you a curveball. Don't stay down too long. Give yourself time to heal from those. Learn the lessons from those things, even if they were outside of your control. Take responsibility for them, but get back up. Do not let anything knock you down for too long. I sat and wallered and I endured things for longer than I should have, because I didn't understand that this is just life. I think one of the things that is dangerous about having so much TV and so much entertainment is we have an unrealistic expectation of life. We have an unrealistic expectation of marriage and an unrealistic expectation of, the white picket fence or whatever your version of life is. So when life throws you a curveball, a lot of people say, well, I'm done. This isn't for me. I can't be or achieve or have the things that I want because I've been thrown a curveball. But you know what? Everybody, every single human being that walks this planet will have curveballs thrown at them. Some are your own doing. Some of us are our own worst enemies, and we get in our own way. Some of them are things that are completely random and out of our control. You could have done nothing to prevent it or change it. It just is what it is. And now you've just got to take responsibility for it. But whatever it is, when it comes, and it's going to come, don't let it knock you down. Get back up. Learn what you have to learn from it. Get the right mindset and keep going. The fourth thing I would tell the younger version of myself is that your decisions matter. They affect your future. So learn to make decisions that think about the future. And Ray Dalio calls it the second and third order, or the second and third, consequence of a decision. So let me give you an example of that. He says, okay, so for example, the first order consequence of exercising is that it hurts and you're tired and you have to put out energy. But the second order consequence is your body gets healthier and stronger. Learn to think about delayed gratification and, the longer term consequences of your decisions. Because here's the thing. Time is a non-renewable resource in your life. So the sooner that you learn how to make better decisions, the easier your life is going to be, just like learning. So here's the thing. Start making good financial decisions now. We don't do a good job educating our population on finances, how to make good financial decisions. learn to seek out resources like Mr. Money Mustache, Dave Ramsey, Tony Robbins has a great book called Money Master the Game. Find these people who understand how to make good financial decisions and not the typical 9-to-5, 401k BS. Truly find people who've learned how to think outside the box and achieve financial independence and start making those decisions now. Take care of your body. I don't care what age you are when you're listening to this. Take care of your body today. It's like the saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The best time to start taking care of your body is 20 years ago. So if you didn't do it 20 years ago, start today. And I wish I would have told the younger version of myself that, because I went through my 20s not taking care of my body, and I got to pay the consequences of that in my 30s. But take care of your body. Surround yourself with healthy people. Again, these are decisions, and this is all under the decision category, by the way. These are the kinds of decisions to think about that have long-term ramifications on your life. Surround yourself with people that are going where you want to go. Find mentors. Find people that inspire you and bring out the best of you. And those are just examples of thinking about the decisions and the second and third level of or order of consequences of those decisions. Don't live your life making decisions that just impact today. Think about what those decisions are down the road. It's very natural to live by your impulses and instincts. That's just kind of like part of being a human. But if you can learn to move past your impulses and instincts into making thoughtful decisions, the sooner you learn to do that, that's part of maturity, by the way. The sooner you learn to do that, the better your life will be. And by the way, this applies to every one of us, because every one of us has an area in our life, and I don't care what age you are, you're listening to this, where we make decisions based on the first order of consequences. And they're not the healthiest for us because we're not thinking about the second and third. Part of maturity is learning to think about the bigger picture. So think about the bigger picture. The younger you are and can think about the bigger picture, the better off you'll be. The fifth thing I would tell myself, now this is very relevant for today, by the way, and I'm going to get into this, is to be an independent thinker. Groupthink is a real thing. There's psychology around this, okay? This is, by the way, the reason for the Electoral College is because our founding fathers understood that when you get a group of people together, they influence each other. We've talked about how people influence you. So groupthink is a real thing. And groupthink, if it's for a positive thing, can be great, but oftentimes it's not. And so I found a Mark Twain quote that I thought was really profound, and I want to share it with you. Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. Let me give you an example in history where there was a very unhealthy groupthink, a nasty little thing in our past called the Holocaust. I read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and what's fascinating about reading that is Hitler was not the only person guilty in the Holocaust. We all know that. But you had soldiers who were guilty. You had these construction companies who were hiring the prisoners from the concentration camps and mistreating them along. You had massive amounts of the population, the majority of the population, that were okay with what was going on because they were group thinking. Learning to be an independent thinker is really, really important. You have to be able to step back and ask yourself, is this right or is this wrong? And this is, I think, the problem with where we are today politically, especially in the United States. We have such a huge divide in our country, politically speaking. And I'm not going to get into politics, but I'm going to talk about the principles that are surrounding this. Because we have people who are so bought into their group's thinking that they have lost the ability to see how the other side perceives this. And so basically what I see happening is you find yourself on one side or the other, and anybody who doesn't agree with you is just an idiot or misinformed. I mean, I've literally had this conversation with somebody who has a different political perspective than me. And basically what this person told me is that I'm misinformed. And I said to this person, I feel the same way about you. I feel like you're misinformed. And what that showed me is that I had lost my independent thinking in this particular political topic. And that's part of the problem. Is as much as easy it is and as convenient as it is to write off anybody who doesn't agree with you as being misinformed or stupid or ignorant or bad or this, I don't believe that the vast majority of people are stupid. I don't believe that the vast majority of people are incapable of thinking for themselves, but I do believe that we have a lot of people that have a lot of influence that have a lot of motive to not tell the truth all the time. And, or even they have their version of what they believe is true and they share that with others. And now we have large groups of people that are, I believe, the vast majority, and I saw somebody say this, and I agree with this. When historians look back on the day and age in which we live, they're going to call this the Great War of Information. I believe the vast majority of this population is misinformed, and that's not intentional, but I think we try to make issues too black and white. And I don't think that any issue is as simple as we'd like to make it. I really think that we've gotten ourselves into trouble by simplifying things that are not simple. I did that for the vast majority of my life. I made everything simple as black and white, black and white. Black and white doesn't really exist in the world. Nothing is as black and white as we'd like it to be. Yes, there are certain things that are, don't get me wrong. There's right and there's wrong. I could go down a list of those things, and this isn't a political conversation, but this is a conversation to point out how not being an independent thinker is why we have so much turmoil in US politics today, because we have too many people that are too big on groupthink, and the hypocrisy that comes along with that is unbelievable. And then you have everybody pointing fingers at each other and nobody's actually thinking for themselves. And so that's just one example of how to think for yourself. Be aware of the fact that groupthink is a real thing. You will be and are influenced by the people around you. And that influence prevents you from seeing things clearly and being objective in the way that you see things. So just keep that in mind. Be an independent thinker. I wish I would have known that when I was younger. It took me a long time because you're scary. It's scary to be an independent thinker. But you know what? Do it. Do not, again, with Mark Twain, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. It doesn't mean the majority is always right or wrong. Excuse me. It doesn't mean it's always right either. Just because it's the majority doesn't make it right or wrong. It just makes it the majority. So just make sure you're learning to be an independent thinker. The sixth thing I would tell my younger self is learn to do hard things. Don't shy away from hard things. It's fascinating because as I look back now, I'll give you an example. We have a friend, my husband and I have a friend who was an athlete in school, a collegiate athlete. And after college, he continued his athletics. And he is not only an extraordinarily successful athlete, he's incredible. I mean, he runs, I could never in my wildest dream keep up with his pace on anything. We were talking about him the other day. That's why I'm giving you this example. He runs marathons at paces that are insane for his age. I mean, in other words, he's not a spring chicken anymore. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to call him out, but he's definitely somebody worth admiring. He works harder than anybody I know when it comes to his athletics, but that is also reflected in every other aspect of his life because he learned how to do hard things at a young age and continued that practice throughout his adulthood. He's now a very well-to-do man. He has a very successful career. Very, very happy and healthy family life. I look at him and I see these years of discipline of doing hard things and how they have paid off throughout his life. Don't shy away from doing hard things because that discipline that you build and that resilience that you build and the ability to do hard things, it manifests itself in every aspect of your life. He eats well, he exercises well, he knows how to go out and do hard things, and he gets to play big because of it. So I would tell my younger self, don't shy away from doing hard things. The seventh thing I would tell my younger self, and this is the last thing. So I only came up with 7 things. Like I said, I didn't want to give a comprehensive list, but this was kind of like my top 7 things, is you've got this. You can do this. You can do life. As I said before, life's going to throw you curveballs. You got to get back up and do it. But it doesn't matter what you face. You've got this. You have everything you need to succeed. And there are billions of other people on the planet and millions of other people who've lived before you who got it, who did it, and who face circumstances much harder than you have. No matter how dire your circumstances are, and I know some of you listening today, you have heartbreaking things in your life, but there's always somebody who's had it worse, who's come out on top. So you've got this. Remember that. It's not always going to feel like that. It's not always going to seem like that. The circumstances aren't always going to look like that, but you've got this. And I can tell you as a person who has seen the bottom of the barrel more times than I would like to admit. I've been financially destitute. I've been relationship destitute. As I've talked about before, I'm in an industry where having a college education is a basic, barrier to entry. And I don't have a college education. I've had to work my way from the bottom up. But regardless of whatever circumstance I faced, I figured it out. You can figure it out. To quote Marie Forleo, everything is figure outable. So you've got this. And don't let the temporary discomfort or the temporary frustration hold you back from remembering you've got this. So again, my question to you is, what would you tell the younger version of yourself if you could go back and say, here are the few things I've picked up and learned along the way. Hey kid, use this and apply it going forward. What have you learned? What would you change? What would you do differently going, if you could go back and relive your life starting at whatever age? And then how can you take all these principles and make sure that you're applying them in your life going forward? Which of the things would you tell your younger self do you not adhere to today? And here's my other challenge to you. Do you have any young people in your life that you can sit down and share your list with? I thought about this. I thought, no, I don't know that I would have listened. So I'm not judging anybody who didn't do this for me. But I wish somebody would have just sat down and said these things to me. Tiana, don't worry about what other people think about you. Be open-minded and learn as much as you can. Life is going to be hard. Get over it. Make sure you're making good decisions because you can make decisions that will set yourself up for the future. Be an independent thinker. Learn to do hard things. I wish somebody would have sat down and said those things to me. And maybe they did, and I was too pig-headed to remember. But nonetheless, take the opportunity to share this with a younger person and encourage them and remind them that, whatever your list is, that, life is really a learning journey. And that's why our species dominates, because we learn how to share information. And so what have you learned in your journey of life? And make sure you're applying those principles so you don't make the same mistake twice. And then how can you share that with somebody else? So I know this is kind of a different type of podcast for Tiana Schowe Ain't Quite Right, but I wanted to go on a different route. I've got a bunch of fun stuff lined up for you. I actually have a good friend who has agreed to. I've talked about this in the past. I'm going to have guests on, but I actually have some good friends that are going to be on very soon. I'm working on all that. That's a little bit more work than just standing and recording. So, I'm looking forward to having guests in the future and diversifying, but I've got some great topics lined up. Again, if there's anything that you would like me to discuss, if there's a topic that you would like to talk about, I spend a lot of time thinking about researching and exploring these topics. So if there's something you say, hey, for example, how to deal with difficult people, or what do you do when you make a mistake? Some of these are on my list coming up. If there's something I can delve into that you would like me to talk about, please drop me an email. You can go to my website at tianaschowe.com and there's a contact me form. Just drop an email in there. I would give you my email address, but it's hard and confusing. It's much easier just to tell you to go to my website. I'd love to hear from you. I get great feedback from all of you. Thank you guys so much, by the way. I just want to say thank you. I'm so humbled. Had over 1,000 downloads of my podcast in 2020. And I started it at the very end of July. So what an honor it is to have so many people tune in and listen on this at the very beginning of this journey. And we're only going to grow and get better as time goes on. So thank you so much for tuning in. As I mentioned, I did start a second podcast. So if you are a person of faith and you would like to be encouraged on my faith-based podcast, it's called Made to Conquer. So you can go to my podcast, my website, madetoconquerpodcast.com. And if you are not a person of faith and you tune in and you're not at all, what is this stuff you're talking about? It's a great podcast because I get very real, very honest. You're going to hear very few Christians who will talk about the things that I talked about in this podcast. I am no holds barred. I'm laying it all out there because I've had a really radical transformation in my life, moving away from religion, moving away from what I call fakeianity, churchianity, religianity, into a true, genuine relationship with Jesus. And as I've gone through that process, as I mentioned earlier, just, rethinking how I read the Bible, I have come to fall in love with Jesus in a way that he is just so unbelievably incredible. He's just amazing. And my life has been radically transformed by the love of Jesus. And so if you're curious, like what is this that she's talking about. I would encourage you to tune into that podcast because I'm really going to open up the Bible. We're going to talk about who Jesus really is and what he really means for your life and debunk the lies and the myths that churchianity, religion and fakianity and all these other dangerous things that have been introduced into society, debunk all those and get back to who Jesus really is. So thank you guys for the first 6 months of support. And I look forward to 2021 where we laugh, learn, and live big. Until next time, this has been Tiana Schowe. Ain't quite right. Thank you for tuning in. For additional content, including my blog and social media, see my website, tianaschowe.com. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe, leave a review, and be sure to tell your friends and family, anyone else that you think might enjoy joining us on this journey. Until next time.